Marianne, guess what? I just snagged a beachfront villa in Hawaii with Dad's money. And guess what else? There's still a hefty sum left for grabs. What a riot, huh? My sister Tessa's shrill voice cut through me like a knife. I stood frozen, phone pressed to my ear, stunned into silence. We had just returned from our father's memorial service less than an hour ago. I knew Tessa could be callous, but this display of greed so soon after Dad's passing shook me. I took a deep breath. Tessa, what on earth are you talking about? I asked. Oh, come on, don't play dumb, she scoffed. Dad's secret inheritance, that rural property worth millions. I convinced his lawyer to sell it right away. I got myself a sweet villa and enough cash to last me a lifetime. But there's more to be had if you stop dragging your feet. I sank onto the couch, bile rising in my throat. You sold Dad's estate without consulting me? Without even letting his will go through probate? My voice shook. This couldn't be happening. Tessa cackled. Consult you about what? That dump of land in Nowhereville. I turned it into prime oceanfront property in Hawaii. Dad would have wanted me to enjoy his money instead of letting it molder away unused. Anger swelled within me. How could she so callously discard our family legacy mere hours after we buried our father? Tessa, think very carefully about what you've done, I said slowly. You didn't just sell some random piece of land. That rural property has been in our family for generations. It meant the world to Dad. Oh, who cares about some outdated sentimental value? Tessa sneered. I got cold hard cash out of the deal. But since you're so emotionally attached, I'll cut you in. For a small fee, of course. I recoiled at her crass words, outrage boiling over. You greedy, soulless witch, I shouted. That land never belonged to just you. Dad wanted us to share it equally. Tessa let out a grating laugh. Share? When have I ever been one for sharing? I saw an opportunity and I seized it. But hey, offer's still on the table if you come to your senses. My hands trembled, fury rendering me momentarily speechless. I wanted nothing more than to reach through the phone and slap her. Tessa, I said slowly, if you think for 1 second I will validate your heinous behavior by taking a single cent of your ill-gotten gains, you are sorely mistaken. Ill-gotten? Tessa snarled. I saw value in that useless property that you clearly couldn't. Admit it, you're just jealous I got to it first while you languished in your bored suburban life. I sighed sharply. There was no getting through to her. Not now, while she was drunk on greed. Goodbye, Tessa, I said curtly. I will be consulting a lawyer about this immediately, and I promise you will come to regret what you've done today. I hung up before she could respond. My hands still trembling, I sank back against the couch cushions. I couldn't believe what had just happened. My own sister had betrayed and robbed me and disgraced our father's memory, all in the name of greed. White-hot rage burned through me, along with bone-deep hurt. I had known Tessa could be selfish, but I never imagined she was capable of such a heartless slight. If only I had seen her true nature sooner. If only Dad could have realized what a cold, calculating opportunist his own daughter had turned out to be. I sat numbly across from my father's lawyer, the echo of his damning words ringing in my ears. I'm afraid your sister Tessa took control of the entirety of your late father's rural inheritance, he said. She somehow accessed his estate plan and persuaded me to finalize an expedited sale of the property on her behalf alone. And you just went ahead without consulting his second beneficiary? I replied incredulously. The lawyer shook his head. I deeply regret my hasty actions. Your sister can be very persuasive, and with the value tied up in that land, I suppose I got swept up in speculation. That land belonged to my father's family for generations. It wasn't just some commercial real estate asset. I took a deep breath, willing myself to remain composed. Tell me exactly what Tessa has done. As I mentioned, she sold off the rural estate in its entirety a few days ago. It was purchased by a resort developer for an impressive sum, which now sits in your sister's personal trust. Bile rose in my throat as I listened to him detail Tessa's unfettered ransacking of our family legacy. She hadn't even waited until probation finished before gutting everything for her own gain. My sister mentioned she secured some beachfront property, I managed. Ah, yes, an extravagant villa in Hawaii, it seems, the lawyer nodded. She immediately allocated a portion of the sale funds for an all-cash purchase. I have the details here. As he prattled off specifics about her lavish new vacation home, one I could scarcely afford to rent even a single week in, let alone own, I saw red. How could Tessa so brazenly pillage our family's multi-generational wealth and fritter it away on some tropical palace? I realized I was gripping my leather handbag tightly enough to blanch my knuckles. I slowly unclenched my fist. "And where is the remainder of the money from the sale?" I asked tightly. "The balance sits in her personal trust," he said, not meeting my eyes. I tried to stop the transaction, but she was quite adamant. "I'll bet she was," I muttered under my breath. Even with a lavish new villa, Tessa's greed knew no bounds. She wanted every last cent for her own gain. "I cannot fully articulate how sorry I am for letting this happen," the lawyer offered weakly. "Your regret won't bring back my family's legacy." I rose swiftly from my chair. "But your testimony will help ensure my wretched sister faces consequences for her deceitful, illegal actions." His shoulders slumped. "Of course. I will provide whatever assistance proves necessary." I gave a curt nod and walked briskly from his office, blood roaring in my ears. I felt utterly violated by Tessa's brazen duplicity. Not only had she robbed me, her only sister, of my legal inheritance, she had debased our family history through her selfish scheming. Any last shred of affection I held for her withered away, replaced by ice-cold rage. As I climbed into my worn sedan, I knew exactly where I needed to go next. My old friend Ryan had become quite the tenacious attorney over the years, and I was in dire need of legal representation to take my backstabbing sister down, no matter the cost. Tessa would rue the day she so arrogantly flouted the law and destroyed our family bonds. I would make damn sure of it. I sat waiting impatiently in my lawyer's plush office, nervously drumming my fingers on the armrest. Ryan breezed in right on time, impeccably dressed as always, and flashed me a sympathetic smile as he settled behind his large oak desk. "Marianne, I'm so terribly sorry to hear about your father's passing," he said gently. "And everything your sister has put you through on top of that. It's positively criminal." I sighed, exhaustion and stress catching up with me. I still can hardly believe Tessa's gall, swiping my entire inheritance out from under me even before Dad was in the ground. I clenched my fists. She must face consequences for this. Ryan nodded gravely as he reviewed the documentation I had provided him, detailing the sale of my father's estate. "Based on these records, your sister violated numerous laws regarding proper probate procedures and beneficiary rights. This appears to be clear-cut fraud and theft. I'm confident we can prosecute her successfully." I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. Finally, a glimmer of hope I could regain what Tessa had so brazenly stolen. "So what's our next move?" I asked. "I'll be filing injunctions immediately, both freezing your sister's existing trust account from further withdrawals, as well as halting any in-progress transactions on the Hawaii property pending litigation." Ryan rifled through more papers, shaking his head. "Honestly, how could your sister think she'd get away with this? Did she truly expect you to just roll over and let her rob you blind?" I sighed heavily. My lawyer wasn't wrong. This wasn't a simple oversight on Tessa's part. She knew exactly what reprehensible actions she willfully chose at every turn, despite having a caring sister she left in the lurch. Tessa simply didn't care who she hurt in her single-minded pursuit of wealth. "My sister has always been opportunistic," I said slowly. "Ever since we were kids, she possessed a knack for exploiting situations to her advantage. I suppose I just never realized how coldly calculating she could be until now." Ryan clicked his tongue sympathetically. "Well, her opportunistic ways have landed her in exceptionally hot water. As soon as these injunctions are served, she'll realize she bet incorrectly against taking on your legal rights." I managed a wan smile. "I appreciate you navigating all this, truly." "Of course. What Tessa did, it's reprehensible and criminally liable," Ryan emphasized. "Rest assured we will recoup every last cent she swindled from you, plus penalties. She won't retain a penny of her illicit earnings when all is said and done." As we reviewed the mountains of documentation together, I felt the knot in my stomach begin ever so slightly to unclench. Though still reeling from Tessa's brazen duplicity, for the first time a glimmer of hope took shape. I might regain what was so cold-heartedly ripped away. Tessa clearly underestimated my ability to fight back against her legal thievery. She was accustomed to people bowing to her coaxing and charms. Not this time, though. This time, her scheming had created an implacable foe, and I would leverage every resource within my power to prosecute Tessa to the fullest extent that the law allowed. She was about to learn her dear sister, in fact, did have teeth, and I fully planned to sink them into every last cent our father intended for me. Tessa may have won the battle by gutting our family legacy for her own gain, but I would decisively win the war by landing her in long-overdue legal consequences instead. I sat hunched over the dining room table late into the night, bleary-eyed, as I pored over the piles of financial records Ryan had provided detailing my late father's estate. Tessa really had been busy gutting Dad's portfolio in his final months while serving as his caretaker. As I examined page after page tracking the rapid liquidation of decades' worth of family assets, my fatigue abruptly shifted to alarm. Something wasn't adding up. The records noted large sums being funneled into unusual, highly speculative investments completely unlike Dad's traditionally conservative portfolio. Dealing in volatile futures rather than blue-chip stocks or reliable bonds made zero sense for an ailing man only months from passing. Just what exactly was Tessa up to, funneling Dad's money like this? I continued digging until I uncovered the smoking gun, signed letters of direction noting the speculative investments were made at the sole discretion of the benefactor's daughter, Tessa Han. My blood ran cold. While overseeing our weakened, struggling father in his dying days, Tessa had taken it upon herself to gamble away the family funds he carefully built over a lifetime, all no doubt in greedy hopes, doubling her own inheritance payout. I wanted to bash my head against the table in frustration at her boundless avarice. Not only had Tessa robbed me blind by liquidating the ancient family estate without permission, she also drove our father's wealth into dangerously speculative channels, in hopes of enriching herself further still. It was unconscionable. As I delved deeper into the convoluted financial records, my horror only mounted. Tessa hadn't merely dabbled in high-risk investments. She went all in on absurdly over-leveraged bets, gambling she could multiply the portfolio many times over. Except, clearly she lost. Big time, from what I could ascertain. Cryptic wire notes indicated margin calls being issued, and defaults looming. No wonder Tessa pounced instantly when she learned of the hidden rural inheritance Dad had omitted mentioning to us. She knew she desperately needed that cash to fill the craters her reckless gambling had created. I shoved the papers away in disgust. Not only had Tessa destroyed any hope of preserving our family's legacy acreage, she'd taken a flaming wrecking ball to Dad's financial portfolio, too, all while smugly assuming her duped sister would remain docilely unaware of the churning disaster she created behind the scenes. An icy calm settled over me. I would ensure Tessa faced absolute ruin for her lies and manipulation. She deserved not 1 cent of our family's wealth after such calculating, fraudulent malfeasance. I would see to it she finally reaped the whirlwind of fury and justice owed for her boundless misdeeds. Let her cry and grovel and gnash her teeth at the disaster about to befall her bogus tropical lifestyle bought through duplicity. Soon enough, desperation would have Tessa crawling back begging for my help, and I planned to slam the door in her wretched lying face as her rightful dues. She would face exposure, debt, and utter defeat. Of that I was now rock-solid determined. I walked briskly into my father's lawyer's office, Ryan trailing close behind. Tessa lounged casually on the leather couch, looking utterly unbothered. Blood pounded in my ears at the sight of her smug face. "Well, if it isn't my darling sister Marianne," Tessa purred as I entered. "So glad you could make it to execute the formal estate paperwork." I bit my tongue hard, resisting the urge to lob harsh words I knew she fully deserved to hear. Today's meeting held a far greater purpose. Settling into a chair opposite Tessa, I met her hooded gaze. "I'm simply here to fulfill my lawful duties as beneficiary, though if I'm being honest, having to look at your face after everything you've done fills me with immense displeasure." Tessa examined her manicure. "Don't be so dramatic. I utilized obscure assets to maximize value for us both. You should be grateful." Red-hot anger licked through me at her flippant tone. If only she knew just how much I now knew about her fraudulent scheming, bleeding our father's accounts dry right under his nose, and how close she teetered to total ruin. At precisely 10 a.m., the lawyer bustled in. Apologies for the delay. Now then, let's proceed with executing your late father's estate distribution. He rifled through papers, scanning details. There is the matter of recent transactions made by one beneficiary, your sister Tessa, regarding sale of the rural familial property bequeathed to you both in equal measure. He peered over his glasses at Tessa. Perhaps you could enlighten us on this matter. Casually examining her nails, Tessa replied, Oh, that. I simply liquidated some unused capital from a stagnant asset. My lawyers handled all the paperwork. She waved a hand. It's nothing for dear sister to fret about. I assured her compensation. Clenching my jaw so tightly it ached, I managed to keep silent. Tessa would trip herself up soon enough. This meeting marked only the first act of her downfall. The lawyer cleared his throat. Yes, well, appropriate probate procedures were clearly not followed, and the estate explicitly states any decisions regarding said property require joint approval. He shuffled papers, scanning an alarming fax just received. Additionally, I have just been notified here of substantial margin calls and defaults on, Tessa, your personal investment accounts. He peered at her over his glasses. Accounts which a portion of estate funds seem to have been redirected into just prior to liquidation of the familial assets. I raised my eyebrows at Tessa, heart pounding with anticipation. This was it. The moment Tessa would be forced to reckon with the destruction her reckless greed had wrought. Tessa waved a hand dismissively despite beads of sweat dotting her brow. A mere cash flow issue causing temporary illiquidity. It's being sorted as we speak. The lawyer frowned. The amounts in question seem quite extreme for a mere cash flow problem. I steeled my nerves. Tessa improperly drained funds from this estate to cover her own disastrously failed investments, I said coldly. She gutted family assets to fuel her greed. How dare you? Tessa leapt to her feet. I invested that money legally and in good faith. Financial markets ebb and flow, but the portfolio shall rebound in due course. I barked out a harsh laugh. Rebound from total default? You drove decades of Dad's hard-earned wealth over a cliff with your reckless gambling right under his dying nose. Tessa and I locked eyes, fury sparking dangerously between us. Today marked only the first volley in my quest to demolish her mountains of lies. I would not leave this office until her despicable swindling began coming to light. I stared out my office window, numbly observing golden leaves dancing on autumn winds. The seasons continued shifting, heedless of the tempest raging within ever since that damning estate meeting. My victorious high at exposing Tessa's fraud quickly crashed straight into vindictive fury and bone-deep anguish. Even Ryan's repeated reassurances we held the legal upper hand provided only hollow solace for the gaping family void Tessa's monstrous betrayal created. A knock on my door jolted me from brooding thoughts. I blinked in surprise to see an elegantly dressed woman standing there, looking supremely out of place in our threadbare counseling center. Marianne, I need to speak with you. Privately, she said briskly. Before I could respond, she stepped inside, closed the door, and sank into the chair opposite my desk. I stiffened in shock to see none other than my sister Tessa herself now perched on the worn metal folding chair, peering at me intently. Her appearance here made zero sense. What more could she possibly take from me at this point? Tessa, I finally managed. What could you possibly want here? She cleared her throat delicately. Marianne, let's not resort to hurling more vitriol. I merely came to talk business. I stared at her in disbelief. Business? You mean beg for more money to rescue your failed gambling debts after bleeding Dad's estate dry? Tessa flattened her skirt, avoiding eye contact. No need for petty verbal attacks, and those investment accounts are temporarily overextended, not failed. When I said nothing, she continued hastily. However, the assets tied up in legal wrangling have proven inconveniently illiquid. I assumed we could negotiate reasonable access. Red-hot rage flooded me as her thinly veiled request became clear. After all the destruction Tessa had wrought, she possessed the gall to waltz in here asking to further raid funds she had not one iota of rights to. I rose swiftly from my desk chair and jabbed a finger toward her. How dare you come begging for handouts after the damage you've caused? You stole and squandered everything without remorse. What makes you think I would give a cent more for you to pillage? Tessa's smooth veneer cracked at my verbal barrage. You know full well the market fluctuates. I simply need temporary cash access, which you continue blocking out of sheer pettiness. Pettiness? My laugh held zero mirth. What's petty is you blowing up Dad's portfolio with reckless investing, then trying to steal my rightful inheritance because your debts came due. I trembled with rage as formerly suppressed emotions spewed forth. Asking me for money takes real nerve. How stupid do you think I am? I know about the high-risk bets and margin calls, Tessa. Ask your country club friends to bail you out. Tessa paled, lips pressed thin. She hissed, "You refuse assistance just to watch me suffer. Fine, wallow in your grudges, but don't expect me to go quietly." She snatched her ostentatious handbag and stormed out, heels clacking angrily across the scuffed linoleum. I sank back heavily into my chair, heart still pounding with adrenaline. Our estranged relationship just shifted permanently past the point of no return. Tessa's actions could never be undone or forgiven. All that remained now was to prosecute her misdeeds to the fullest and watch her new sham life crumble to ash just as she deserved. I pulled up to the curb outside Tessa's once grand villa, now with a glaring for sale sign planted on the disheveled lawn. I sat staring for several minutes, equal parts rage and sadness swirling within at how dramatically my wretched sister had fallen. With injunctions freezing access to her trusts, the lawsuits I filed left Tessa scrambling to fund her lavish lifestyle, seemingly overnight. I discovered she leveraged the Hawaii home to the hilt during purchase, leaving no equity cushion when hardship hit. Served with lawyer demand letters and crushing interest payments, within months, Tessa faced a forced sale to cover towering debts. I only learned after seeing the listing appear online, promoting a discount on this former luxury paradise retreat, now desperately seeking any buyer to stop the bleeding. Part of me questions if I should feel guilty for so zealously executing the legal punishment she deserves. Perhaps months more struggling would have taught Tessa humility, absent my intervention? But the anger churning within drowned out any flicker of sympathy upon realizing the extent she had gutted our family legacy solely for her selfish gain. My phone buzzed with an incoming call screening as Tessa's office number. Jabbing the red decline button, I started my engine back up to head home. I had come seeking closure, but strangely only felt hollow sadness at how irreparably broken bonds between two sisters had become. Just then, my phone began buzzing incessantly with repeated calls from her office. Finally, on what must have been the 20th try, I slid the answer bar, snarling into the receiver, "What could you possibly want now, Tessa? Haven't you taken enough?" Instead of my sister's snotty tone, a strained masculine voice responded, "Pardon the intrusion, ma'am. This is Timothy, Mr. Han's executive assistant. I'm afraid I have rather urgent news regarding your sister." I sat upright. "What's happened?" "It's quite serious, I'm afraid," Timothy answered grimly. "The financial stress impacted her health most severely. Yesterday afternoon, Miss Han collapsed in the office from what physicians believe was a hypertensive crisis stroke. She remains unconscious in intensive care presently." My stomach dropped as his words registered fully. However bitter our feud, Tessa remained family. If she teetered gravely ill, self-recriminations flooded my chest with tightness, struggled breathing around. "Please send the name of the hospital she's at now." "I need to come right away," I managed weakly, fully processing how devastating delivering this call must be for her loyal assistant, too. Timothy gently provided the critical details, then said softly, "I know you two endured painful differences recently, and my role is not to pry." "No, it's all right," I interrupted heavily. "Perhaps I should have tried harder to prevent things deteriorating this far." I pressed 2 fingers to my temple, closing my eyes against threatening tears. "Just please, take care of her as best as possible. Let the medical bills route to me. Price doesn't matter now." After ending the call, I slumped over the steering wheel, utterly drained. This was not at all the ending I wished for Tessa, despite her reprehensible choices. Seeing the full-depth consequences now cut her down stirred only profound sadness that I played a pivotal role enabling her disastrous undoing. Perhaps fate deemed the justice I so ruthlessly delivered overly severe. If Tessa never recovered, guilt over my own hardened vindictiveness would surely haunt me forevermore. I hesitantly stepped through the sunlit doorway of my beach cottage, stiffening at the sight of Tessa seated calmly at my worn kitchen table. Though still gaunt, she sipped tea with the easy grace I recalled from happier times together before her unquenchable avarice poisoned everything good between us. Approaching slowly, I cleared my throat and offered a wan smile. "Tessa, how are you feeling today?" I hadn't seen her conscious since rushing to her hospital bedside several weeks before, following news of her shattering stroke. She glanced up, abashed expression seeming unfamiliar on typically haughty features, now robbed of their sheen after enduring such a brutal physical blow. "Marianne, please do sit if you're willing," she said haltingly. "I hoped we might talk." Her uncertain tone conveyed none of the imperious sister I knew, yet still seemed sincere in seeking reconciliation after tragedy, finally opened her eyes to callous past mistakes carved purely in the name of greed. I settled quietly across from this woman I once knew so well, yet still felt so estranged from by tangled hurts we both unwittingly inflicted in the throes of our feud over inheritance. Timid hope sparked perhaps we might finally build anew from the ashes. "Tessa, of course I'm open to talking." I swallowed tightly. "I can't change decisions made in anger that I regret, but please know seeing you so gravely ill terrified me. You're still family, despite everything." My voice cracked with emotion. I hoped desperately she grasped my remorse ran bone deep. I never wished her harm, only justice against remorseless financial crimes. Tessa turned her teacup slowly, staring into the dark liquid as though it held difficult answers. When she finally met my earnest gaze, her eyes glimmered with what appeared tears. "Marianne, I realize words could never undo damage my selfish choices caused." She worried her lip before continuing hoarsely. "Greed for wealth beyond any reason corrupted me. I became consumed with possessing the shiniest trinkets money could buy." Here she faltered, dropping her face into waiting hands as racking sobs overwhelmed composed words. I sat stunned, profoundly moved, witnessing in this raw moment the depth where greedy fantasies plunged my sister into nightmarish consequences she now appeared to genuinely mourn. I tentatively reached a comforting hand toward her shoulder. Long minutes passed with only the sounds of gulls swooping low over crashing waves filling the salty air. When Tessa finally lifted her head, streaks lining both cheeks, clarity shone from her gaze I hadn't glimpsed since we were innocent girls giggling over silly secrets. "Please say you forgive me, Marianne," she implored, voice jagged with emotion. I was a damned fool chasing fantasies money purportedly guaranteed. Nothing purchased fulfilled me. Now disabled and destitute, I've truly lost everything meaningful. Her fingers knotted, betraying lingering distress over dumbfounding, change-blown fortunes. Mutely I grasped her hands. Feels there's softness underneath mine. "Hush, Tessa, just rest easy," I murmured gently. "We sisters shared joyful times too over the years." I sighed, old regrets stirring. "I admit vengeful retaliation consumed me for a time, but seeing your anguish now has reopened my heart." Tessa clung to me like a life raft, tears flowing freely as we held space for healing. My legal justice had been delivered, however harshly. Her punishment against outrageous family betrayal meted out in full. Perhaps now a quieter grace could finally emerge from the ashes of mistakes blind greed wrought. If we both allowed it.